Great. Okay, what I'm going to do is to mute all of you, or at least, around about another few minutes. Just give a few people a few more minutes, and then we get cracking. Now we have somebody called Maggie. I don't know. I haven't seen Maggie there before. Is that Maggie Crawford? I'm not sure.
Where do you want it?
Yes, hi Shafiq.
Oh, is that you, Maggie?
It is me.
Oh, good.
You can't see me.
Yeah, and Monique, welcome. Excellent.
Thank you.
Very good. I'm just waiting for a couple more minutes before we get going. I'm going to mute all of you, and then we'll get cracking. I'm going to I've got the school playground under me, so there's a bit of noise there.
Aren't they on holiday today, Shafiq?
Sorry?
The kids at the school, you said, downstairs, but aren't
It's
they
a
on...
playground, actually. It's for little children, you know?
I see.
Up to 10, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got all these little swings and this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
And so we get a lot of them coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm just going to go and mute all of you. No. All right, and I'm on recording. I think I'm recording anyway. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I'm recording all right. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to see you all on Easter. Another opportunity to greet you all. I had lots of little messages from various places with bunnies and Easter eggs and so on them. It's a season, I think, for renewal, as they call it. And I think it's wonderful to be able to at least have at the same time a bit of easing of the lockdown, so we can go out a bit. What I'm going to be doing is just, doing a series, as I've already said before. We cover some of the items which are underreported and some which are not reported at all. And in that sense, one of the topics that, the earlier topics that we've done, of course, is some of the stuff that you all have heard. And if you haven't, then you can go to the archive. And on the type table, if you click on that archive, you get all the old talks that are there. There's some 50 of them on various subjects. But the subject of the series that I'm going to be talking about, we just started a couple of weeks ago, is about the contributions, the forgotten contributions of Islam. And it is interesting because I'm finding out myself there is a lot that has happened by way of those early thinkers who did make big contributions to our way of life. And we are, in fact, very grateful to them. And we are going to be covering a lot of those people's ideas in our talks. What I did in the first two is to introduce the subject, basically saying the dark ages of Europe from the 600 AD to 1600 AD, that's from the Greeks right up to the Renaissance, was considered the dark ages. And that's when, Europe didn't sort of really have much happening. But close to Europe, of course, the East, Near East, had a lot of things happening, and that's known as the Golden Period. I've mentioned that in the last two sort of lectures, so I won't go into that too much. But today, what we are going to be talking about is a category of contributions which can be associated with the house or with the home. I'm not talking about philosophy here or big engineering projects and architecture or anything like that this time. We will cover those sort of things subsequent to the later parts of our talks over the term. But today it'll be much more a focus on at the home and the things that we use. And the sort of things that we are going to be talking about is this. I mean, coffee and clocks and crankshaft, cameras, perfume industry, chairs, fine dining, carpets, planners. These are the sort of things that really were, in fact, taken very seriously by the Muslims of the Golden Era, and they made big contributions towards that. What you see, one of the big things that did happen at the time of the Golden Era of Muslims is from that period onwards, 700 AD to 1600, I said, was that Arabic became the lingua franca, if you like, of that region. Now, when you have a common language, that makes for a big difference in communication. And because the empire of the caliphs was so large, stretching at one time from Spain right up to Indonesia eventually, including India, but most of that region was focused around, say, North Africa and Middle East, where the Arabic language became, very common. It was not to say that everybody was forced into learning the language, but what the government of the day did was to encourage people to learn the language because the jobs were offered for those people who had the language. A bit like English today, if you have English, wherever in the world you may be, it is a big asset. And now, of course, Chinese is becoming that. Not very many people outside of China seem to speak Chinese, and it's one of those things that I think needs to be taken up by the rest of the world fairly quickly. Anyway, that language enabled the various parts of the empire to collect the information that was available of that region, bring it to the center, and be able to translate that and then have it at your fingertips. A bit like our iPhone today, you just tap on it and you get the information you want. So there you had to go to the House of Wisdom and you had that information available in Arabic, which then sort of really provided it as an accelerator for knowledge. Rather than having a silo approach to developing a certain discipline, what happened was that it had the cross-discipline possibilities and that diversity, which is one of the things that I talked about last time. We've shown scientifically as well that diversity in any community leads to greater creativity. And this has been empirically proved as well, and people have done studies on this. So you can see that's one of the reasons why the Muslim era made such huge contributions, because the basic ingredients were there. The caliphs provided the facilities, the buildings, encouraged the people to come in from wherever they were, whatever the language was, whatever ethnicity it was, or religion, they were welcome. And they came in and they sort of sat and they sort of worked together. So that was a big, big, big incentive for everybody to be able to advance the knowledge of the day. So let's move into this thing about first. Okay, here, just a reminder here saying that do we ever wonder where some of the things we use in every day come from? Of course, we take a lot of things for granted, and it's quite amusing when some children were asked some time back, where does milk come from? They said, well, from cartons, not cows. And even some were asked, where does spaghetti come from? They said, it grows on trees. So, we need to be able to extend our realm of awareness beyond what we see in the supermarket. Did we know that the glass crystal coffee perfumes were developed by men and women in the Muslim world over 1,000 years ago? So 1,000 years is that period of 600 AD to 1600 AD. So that's 1,000 years, which is quite an astonishingly large sort of period of time. Nowadays, we see about 1.6 billion cups of coffee are drunk every day. And one of the things that has come out is whether it's going to be sustainable to be able to keep drinking so much coffee and still be able to grow enough of it. So that's a question that's, of course, we'll be struggling with, I suppose, in future, or at least the coffee drinkers. So it was a sort of popular stimulant discovered in Arabia, well, actually in Yemen, and the beans were then sort of brought in, and they made sort of coffee from it. And then, of course, we'll talk about this Al-Kindi as well, because Al-Kindi is a remarkable polymath again, who has incredible sort of mind to go into all sorts of fields. And he went into, and he's regarded as the father of perfumes as well. And his books are there, which are still followed, I'm told, by some of the French perfumeries that are there. Okay, this is the coffee, you have seen this, and we see in our Costa and of course Starbucks and everything. It is a very, very popular drink. Not all of us can drink it. I can drink tea, but not too much coffee. But the smell of coffee is fantastic. So it is a coffee that started to be drunk at the time, of that period of the Muslim era there. Okay, a bit of the history is from Eastern Africa. Then it spread to Egypt and Yemen. And what we have in the 15th century, the Sufi monasteries of Yemen, where coffee beans were first roasted and brewed in a similar way to how coffee is now prepared. So that's going back to the year 1400 plus. So that's the 15th century. So it's one of those things that I think is a good legacy to remember. By 16th century, it reached the rest of the Middle East, Persia, Turkey, and North Africa. From the Muslim world, coffee then spread to Italy. And Italy, it makes the best coffees practically nowadays, and they make the best coffee machines, the cappuccinos and all that. So it's fantastic that they've got that from developed it to that point of what we have today. And then, of course, into Europe and to all the Americas after that. Now, this is just a picture of a coffee house there in, it came from the 10th century, 17th century. So you can see a little picture of that. It seems to be a portable type of cafe. There's, I'm not sure how well we can see this, but let me see if I can extend that a little bit. Okay. There we are. No, not much to see, except to see the groups of people sitting down, having a little coffee together and chatting. And it is this atmosphere that became, in fact, popular with the coffee houses in England. And that's where, if you like, the business got conducted, and eventually the stock exchange was, in fact, became possible after that, where people then said, okay, we're going to start trading. And so the coffee gave rise to that type of gathering and business opportunities, and what we have is a stock exchange today. Now, okay, we just move away from the coffee for a bit, and then we'll talk about this guy, Al-Jazari, extraordinary engineer. And we are going to be talking about him because of the clock, the timekeeping device. And he made an extraordinary device. Now, I would say, I mean, time, of course, has always been important for everybody, even before the Muslim era and so on. But what happened during the Islamic sort of period was that there was a big emphasis on the prayer times, because you had to pray 5 times, and you need to be able to pray at the time that is denoted. And then, of course, you also needed to fast on a particular day, a particular month of the year. So you needed to be able to have a measuring devices that would enable you to do that. And in addition to the date and the time, you also needed the direction. The direction, because every Muslim prays towards Mecca. Mecca has the Kaaba, which is that black sort of cubicle thing there. And that Kaaba is where all the gods were there prior to the Muslim period. Now all those gods have been removed and it's empty. But what it does give is the direction. Now Muslims used to pray towards Jerusalem before that happened, before the Kaaba became the point at which Muhammad said, well, we are going to change the direction because God has indicated to us we can now face towards Mecca and not towards Jerusalem. So that direction from any part of the world, Muslims need to know which direction. And because through the year, times and the days change and the sun sort of settings change, so the direction needed to be there as well. So that led the engineers to devise gadgets to help that. I'll talk about the astrolabe later, because that requires a fair amount of explanation as well. And that enabled the direction and the time and the date to be given from wherever you are in the world. Although it was available at one time, a sort of a crude form, but later when the Arabs took it over, they made it much more refined so that you could sort of take it, you can use it at any point where you were, and not just a dedicated latitude. Anyway, we'll talk more about that when we talk about the astrolabe. But here, just to know that that religious requirement made the effort of the engineers that much more demanded. Now, this is a clock. Let me just again make that a bit bigger if I can. Right, now this is quite interesting. It may be a little bit intricate, but what it does do is that here is the water here, and this is the wheel down here. So when the water sort of trickles down, it turns the wheel. And that wheel then has this yellow rod that turns that into a movement. So you can see the water, it's like a water mill, changing it into a rotary movement into different types of requirement that you may have. So this is one of the ways that they have been able to, I'll talk about that a little bit more clearly perhaps here. This is, okay, this is another device which takes, again, a movement where the water is then sort of, enables this this arm here to move up and down, depending on the water draining or the water raising in that sort of at the bottom there. The same thing here, this crankshaft down there causes rotary movement, create these pistons to move from side to side. It's a bit small, I suppose. To see. Maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, here we are. Okay, there we are. These are the pistons, and this is the rotary thing there where water can move it by dropping, and this creates a vacuum, and it sort of goes through the pipe in order to use that vacuum in some special way. And this here was the crankshaft, which I think I'll make it bigger again, this one. Make that, the other one go down a bit. Okay, here we are. So the water over here is the tank here, and it scoops the water up by moving up and down. depending on the level of the water in here. Anyway, those are the mechanics of this. And it's a similar thing to the elephant clock that was powered by water. At that time, again, it was a pretty intricate sort of piece of engineering to do, where here, this is the stomach, if you like, where the water is. And in the stomach of this elephant was this little basket or a bowl, which had a tiny little hole in it. So as it, drew the water into the bowl, it sank. And as it sank, it sort of tugged this little cord here. And that sort of gave if you like, the sort of movement for the other parts of this thing to take place. Now, if I make that bigger, let me move that down. So here is the original water clock. And what happens is in the stomach is the water motor, if you like. And that causes that string to be pulled, and that string then sort of controls these arms down here to turn the hour and half an hour and minute time. So you can see there is a bit of engineering involved, and he successfully managed to bring in and give credit to all the people who have, in fact, preceded him. So there is the Egyptians, and then, of course, the Hindus, and all the other people who have contributed to the development of the clocks. So quite a good sort of engineer. Okay, I won't talk too much about it. We'll talk about the other devices later. Okay, this is again something to do with, a crankshaft. You know what a crankshaft is? It's a bit like what we have in our engine in the car, where, the pistons, when they burn the petrol, the power moves the thing there from and turns the crank into a vertical thing, into a rotary sort of movement. It's this being depicted here by one of these. Okay, let's just move that on. So here we are. So this as the water sort of gets drained, then this cork over here is opened up and water then comes down here. So it fills up the tank again. So again, basically playing around with various types of movements. Now this is the modern crankshaft that we have in our cars. These are the pistons. And the pistons then sort of move up and down, and that creates the rotary movement, moves the wheel here. That's basically the car. Okay, another big sort of development that we can see, which we are using, is the camera. Now, we've heard of this camera obscura in Middle Ages or after the Renaissance, when painters started to use it. That actually is something that came about at this period, which is the 10th century here. And the way that they brought about that is that this happened where this person observed that through a small little hole in a wall, the light then travels in straight lines and puts out an upside down image of the one outside. That's the principle of the pinhole camera. And that is the principle that is being used as well in that camera obscura by painters later on in Europe. Here you see one of those painters at work where they project the scenery outside and then, of course, gets painted upside down. Now, in Europe, it wasn't the case that the light was understood too well, because there were various theories about how we see. And the ideas were that something goes out of our eyes And that's what causes us to recognize an object outside. Whereas the Arabs, they had that very big advances in optics. We'll talk about it at a later date, about how much detailed work they did of optics, and of course came up with this thing that the light enters our eyes, and that's how we see it. A bit like that pinhole camera that you can see. Now here is a picture of Weimar. He is a painter of note. He did use this camera obscura when it came to Europe. And you can see this carpet design. It's an Arabic design carpet, which is depicted very well in that painting because it was using this camera obscura type of technique. Now, he's not the only person that did the type of technique, but he certainly was something that I found here to be very, very much connecting to what the Arabs had done. And this painter is during the Renaissance, which is, the 1600, which is really coming out of the Dark Ages. Now, one of the things that also, which is interesting, is that Al-Kindi, he lived in the year 800 to 877. He came out with a musical theory, which, in fact, this French scholar Laborde, in his book, attribute the do re mi to this type of musical representation that Al-Kindi had come up with. For instance, here it is. If you take this musical note, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, re, it is the Arabic numerals for that are here, which is like this: mim, fe, sad, lam, sin, dal, re. So it is those notes that then became part of the do, re, mi. Although in Europe, what has happened is that it was one of those things that, of course, Kindi did in these years over here. He wrote some books as well and used music for, I think this, for therapy and so on. And first time some musiki, that's the term, also came about from him. This is again going back to saying that the notation, which consists of syllables known as solvenization, do, re, mi, is widely known as Latin borrowed from the syllables of hymn of Saint John, the Italian musician Guido Arezzo, in this year 995 to 1050. Now we saw that Kindi was at this time here, so a good 100 years before, and therefore this guy Vilote, in 1839, took the position of Laborde, admitting that Muslims influenced on the theory of music. From comparing Guido's music scale with that of the Muslims, he found striking resemblance, which led him to believe that the former had adopted his theory from the Muslims. So you can see there is a remarkable sort of insight that has come about, that even something so fundamental as do, re, mi has its origins in the Arabic, the Arab world. Okay, now the use of perfumes. Now this is another thing that I think is very important, because according to religion, we are supposed to sort of, use perfume as much as we can. Those, of course, who can afford it can use it more. But I remember when I was young, we used to go to the mosque for prayers and so on. And our elders used to put some scent on us, It was something that made you smell good. And of course, that is one of those things that is still very much part of the tradition of the Muslim culture, that they use scents of various types. But the sort of thing that really, what advance they did in perfume is what is known as distillation. Anyhow, we'll come to that, I think, the next slide. Here is just saying that, we need to be able to use this as freely as possible and as much as possible and maintain the cleanliness and so on, which is mandatory for religious reasons as well. So here, Kindi is regarded as father of the perfume industry. So here, I'll just make this a bit bigger so that, Ilke was the first to identify and purify alcohol. Today, alcohol is used in hundreds of industrial processes. So this process of distillation is what really sort of was brought about the Arabs, a big change. The distillation, if one is not too sure of what it is to be able to sort of boil something and catch the essence and then have it condensate. That is distillation. And that is the process that the Arabs introduced and had innumerable amount of advances in perfume because of that. Okay, we'll talk about El-Kindi also about the philosophy, because he was quite a remarkable scholar at a later date. So his contribution to perfume, he invented many recipes. He wrote this book of chemistry on perfumes and distillation. It contained more than 100 recipes for fragrant oils, salves, and aromatic waters, and so on, and 107 methods of recipes, which still bears, now they use the equipment called alembic. Now, alembic is one of those, retort type of things that you see in chemistry. You have the two things linked up with a little pipe where you sort of, heat up the liquid, and that condensate goes there and settles down in the other. So that's that type of device. Now, that's the old version over here. And what here is you're doing the heat here, and depending on the condensate's heaviness, this will condensate into different sort of pots here. This is exactly what the refineries in the oil industry do at the moment. You see these big columns of waters and of petroleum, and at each level, the condensate sort of is captured, and that can lead to different types of products. So when you distillate, if you like, oil, you get lots of other types of products as well, depending on the density of that product. As you have kerosene, you've got this heavy petrol as well. So there are various types of things that you condensate too. Okay, he's one of the distillation experts. His name was Jabir al-Hayam. So we won't go there. We'll just look at that, basically saying that. But they used it a lot for perfume making, as you can see here. This is the modern day refinery where the same sort of process is being used, distillation. See, without the process of distillation, and in this case of crude oil, we would have no gasoline, kerosene, asphalt, or plastics. So you can see it's a very basic process for what the sort of things that we use. Now, of course, the rose, this is, rose is also, all the herbs and all that were available because it was a trading center. And that meant we had, access to all the basic ingredients. And you had these polymath and scientists in Baghdad mostly, or in that Muslim era, which had access to information. They were able to, use these to produce the necessary products of scents and perfumes. This is just saying that we've got these the ingredients over there that can be used for scents and so on. Okay, even glass. Muslims in the 19th century find the creation of glass crystal and stone. Islamic potters developed the art of stylish dining with a variety of ceramic and glazes. 16th century manuscripts show commander-in-chief providing the feast to his generals. I think it's down here. Now we'll just extend that a little bit. So basically, you know, high living for, well, one of the things that is very striking about the Muslim era is that even if you look at, and I'll talk about that in a later date, when you look at buildings like the Taj Mahal or even the Alhambra in Granada, they're beautifully constructed buildings. So the sense of aesthetics, so they were very, their senses were very refined. You know, utilizing perfume and the foods and the silks and so on. So very, very sort of developed senses of aesthetics and taste. Now, he's another one of those people we'll be talking about again later when it comes to philosophy. He was a Muslim doctor, chemist. So he's also known for his extracting oils and flowers, means of distillation. So the Arabic technique of distilling and extracting perfumes eventually reached Europe through trade and crusades. Hello, you want to sort of mute yourself? Okay, yeah, this is the same thing about Ibn Sina. We'll talk about him later. Now, this is basically saying that the arrival of all these knowledge and products came into Europe through trade. So you can have this guild going back to 11th century, which shows that they traded with Muslims in spices, perfumes, ingredients, and dyes. So all these products came from that region into Europe. Now, as Caterina de' Medici initiated the perfume industry in Europe when she left Italy in the 16th century to marry the French crown prince. So you can see Italy being close to the Muslim sort of lands over there was very much into the trade and adopting the skills of the day and the knowledge of the day. This is just pictures of various shops at that period. Okay, now coming to chess, this is a game that was originated in India, but as it came into through Persia and into the Middle East and finally into Europe, its nomenclature also started to change, the name started to change. And some of those things are just mentioned here. It says, okay, all early Persian references to chess use the word chaturang from the Sanskrit chaturanga in 4 parts, which describes the 4 components of early Indian army, infantry, cavalry, and elephant. So these, as you know, are the little pieces on the chessboard. So you have the elephants, which are called the rook today, and the cavalry is the knight, and the infantry is the pawn, and the army, I suppose, the head is the king and the queen or the general, whoever it may be. So it was introduced and came into Europe, and some of the caliphs promoted the culture of education and encouraged all the sciences. They were also receptive to intellectual games like this. Some of the words that have stuck from the earlier times are these here. Now, rook, as told you, is elephant. Al-fil, that's the Arabic word, the rook. And then shah, is the Czech word. Czech comes from shah because checkmate is shah mat, means checkmate. Mat means kill. So these are, and of course, Czech, the chess comes with the French, is also this variations of the Shah. So it's Persian origin, change of or origins of those words. Now, carpets is another sort of area which was promoted by the Muslim era because they loved carpets, like to sit on it. And here, Henry VIII was so impressed, he ordered 400 carpets from the Muslim sources. So these sort of carpets were very sort of highly appreciated. Now, great patron of the carpet industry is Shahbaz of the Safavid. The Safavid is the Persian dynasty, the Muslim era again. And he brought in this skill, which was really, this at the peasant sort of level, hands of the peasants, so it says, and brought these prestigious artists to work as a national industry. So he really promoted that. And up to that point, before that period, is that Seljuk Muslims, the carpet reached a high degree of proficiency and technique and high quality of design. So you can see these Seljuks. And now I've been watching this Etrul, the Ottoman type of series on Netflix. And we see that the dynasties of that time are very much the ones that promoted these types of skills. Here are the intricate patterns that the Arabs sort of have, and the motif is usually geometric, floral or geometric. No humans are shown in it. So, okay, so now that, okay, cleanliness, according to cleanliness, of course, they have something called any ancient toothbrush. It's just like a little stick of a tree, which you pound one end of it. We had that, and you just use it as a brush to clean your teeth. It's already antiseptic type of resin in it. So very good type of thing that they have been using in the old days. Okay, I'll stop over here. And then we'll have a Q&A, if you like. Okay. Stop the share. Make it bigger. Okay. Right. I'll bring all of you in there into your gallery view. Okay, here we are. Good. You'll have to unmute yourself. So if you have any questions of any sort. Okay, George, I see your hand waving. Go ahead.
Very good.
See you.
What about magic flying carpets?
Well, I don't know whether you heard that on the radio recently. They did a very good program on 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights.
Yes.
Sherazad and Dunyazad. And Shahryar, the ruler. Now there are, of course, the original didn't have 1,000 stories in it, but about 280 or thereabouts. But they were collected from various parts of that region, some from India even, and in Persia, Middle East, wherever. And it is the stuff of what I would call a very imaginative mind, and that introduced the flying carpet. And I think that's a very comfortable way of traveling, I think.
Interesting, though.
What?
Interesting. Always had a very handsome young lady on it.
Didn't get it.
Is it always had a handsome young lady riding on it?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's always the prince on it. So if the prince is there, there's always probably a lady as well. Yeah. Right. Anybody else has a question? Oh, yeah, Malala. Have to undo your audio.
Right.
Okay.
I was confusing myself with terminology. I kept wondering, now where does Persia come into this? But then I realized that you're including all those countries. Now, when you say Arab, I don't know why. I thought Arab meant the Arabs from, that center Saudi Arabia sort of place. And the Persians are Persians, and the Iraqis, I don't know, are they different? So these are all different countries, and maybe they had their own culture.
Yeah, in fact, the Muslim sort of, the Caliphate, the Muslim sort of empire was so extensive. They had numerous ethnic groups and languages and what have you. But they promoted Arabic language, which I mentioned earlier on, which enabled, everybody to bring in that piece of knowledge that they had to one place, and that really accelerated the development and the knowledge of the whole empire. So I'm using Arab loosely in that sense. I would say Muslim.
Right. Okay.
Muslim
Right.
is the
Yeah.
era.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I use that in our introduction. I call it the Muslim era, but I'm using Arab as
Ah, right.
basically,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
this
I
type
see.
of thing that a lot of scholars are from different regions. In fact, a lot of them from Persia, from Andalusia, from, you know,
Oh, right. Yes.
wherever.
Yes.
Mm.
So did the Persians change their language? Was there a different Persian language, or do they all now sort of speak the same?
No, they held on to the language, Farsi. Farsi is
Farsi,
their sort
yeah.
of language, and it's a very much older culture than the Arabian culture. But the Arabs had a lot of success in sort of against both the Byzantinian and the Safavids, who were the Persian sort of dynasties of the day. And this, you know, the Arab sort of upstarts, as it were, they came in because their ideology seemed to be so modern and relevant that it sort of got the support of all the people. Whereas the older type of entrenched dynasties, the Byzantine and the Safavids, they were suffering from basically being entrenched in old ways and therefore not responsive to the needs of the people.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Nimi.
Okay, yes. So when is the most recent thing created, produced by the Muslims now? So going back from where we are at the moment, and having had such a head start almost based on you know, everything you've shown us, when did it start to wane? And then, you know, all we hear about Islam now is, you know, women should wear this and they shouldn't do this and blah, blah, blah. Where is the substance, as you've just shown us? Is it still there somewhere and we're just not seeing it, or what?
Well, the Muslims haven't come out of their declined, if you like, state. And you see, what had happened was that after the caliphates started to sort of diminish in their power, and the big sort of World War I came about, and they lost out, and a lot of this whole Muslim empire, the Ottoman Empire, was split up into the countries that we see today, which happen to be what Syria uh, and Iraq and Yemen and Libya and all the countries that are in a mess, in fact. It goes to show that the Muslims had them under control because they had a very enlightened approach, and they had what is called the millet system. The millet system is one which allows the individual ethnic groups and religious groups to manage their own affairs and have their own law applicable to their own people. It was only when they interacted with the Muslim people and had a conflict, then the Muslim courts would step in. So if you like, the religious local leaders of various ethnic communities, they were quite happy to a large extent to, you know, have the local power that they needed and maintain that status. Now that whole thing changed after the, actually from the 14th century, 15th century onwards, because the Mongols had come in, destroyed the House of Wisdom, killed off a lot of you know, thinkers, and then the religious thought prevailed. And one of those people who was very prominent in that is Ghazali. Ghazali, he was a man of what they call Kalam, you know, philosophy, which is, you know, very much to do with religious type of philosophy. And we'll talk about this in our later sort of you know, sessions, where there have been people like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, who then propounded different types of policies, philosophies, which then started to take, if you like, root in Europe. Ibn Rushd is one of those who contributed to more a rationalist approach and not necessarily a religious approach. So it was the religious approach that sort of prevailed, that brought the decline, if you like, in the early parts of the 14th, 15th century, I suppose, before the Renaissance. That's the decline when the Mongols had come, destroyed that, those people who were there at their apogee, if you like. And then, of course, the rulers then who maintained the empire, they weren't the most creative. And then, of course, colonialism came in because, after World War, before even the World War, the colonialists land and their sort of, if you like, technology won over the various types of countries. And they have not really got back on their feet as yet, because you see their leadership has been so poor since the even pre-colonial days that things need now to sort of really move ahead. And I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Yeah, Pam.
I was just going to say a lot of the trouble was caused by Gulbenkian, who was Armenian. And after the First World War, he got a red pencil and he drew lines on the map and said, that's Iraq, that's, Syria. He split up the Middle East and he took 4% on each deal he did with the oil companies. He made a fortune. Yeah. But he's got a lot to answer for by splitting up all these different tribes and areas into countries.
There were two guys in addition to that, was called Pike Pico Sykes.
Oh yes, yes.
These two guys, the French and the English, they also sort of helped, I think, to sit down and draw the lines, which were really quite extraordinarily short thinking in there. Because although these were two colonial powers, French and Britain, when they looked at the Ottoman Empire and they put these lines across, they put the lines in order to sort of try and, well, from what we can make out today, if you look at the Iraq and Syria today, the Sunni belt has been cut right down the middle. So that you have Iraq, we have the Sunnis in minority, and vice versa in Syria. So that type of demographics made a big setback for these individual countries to come together and pursue, good policies. So in a way, these countries are coming out of the colonial period and maybe might get somewhere, perhaps, with China coming in, we hope, and with the Belt and Road. Yeah, I don't know whether,
Shafiq, Ibn Rushd, do we know him as Averroes?
That's right, that's him, Averroes, yes. And Ibn Sina was Avicenna. Ibn Rushd was the rationalist who tried to bring in the Kalam and the rationalists together, the religious and the rationalists together, and said both are acceptable. So we'll look into his philosophy at a later session.
Thank you.
Shafiq, wasn't the Balfour Treaty largely responsible for the breakup of, the formations of these countries? And
Balfour was very much instrumental in creating Israel. And one of the things that, one could sort of look at in a little more holistic sense and say, in between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the British had something called the Durand Line, that separates the two countries. And in between Pakistan and India, they have something called the Radcliffe Line, That's the time done at the time of partition. But unfortunately, in Palestine, they put in the line, you see. So that is the big mistake, or if you like, deliberate or otherwise, that is causing the present day problem. Because that line was not put in by the British at that time, it is in such a mess today.
Interesting. So the Palestinians, what type of what type of Islamic people are they?
They are Sunnis.
Sunnis, yeah.
Sunnis, yeah.
Right.
Very much. See, most of the Shias are actually in Iran. About 90% of the population is Shia, and they have in Iraq as well a sizable majority. But Saddam was the Sunni leader with a sizable Shia majority, and in Syria, you've got a sizable Sunni majority with Assad being the Shia. So you can see the topsy-turvy type of structure that is there, which is causing endless problems. Yeah, Jim.
Just to clarify the difference in terms of rationalism between Sunni and Shia, is it an approach to rationalism or just interpretations?
No, these the Shia and Sunni, they have evolved their own practices in a different way, because you see, they came about in this way, that when Muhammad died, the sort of his position was going to be democratically elected, in that sense. They didn't want it to become a hereditary type of position. So, there were the 4 Khalifas who were regarded by both Shias and Sunnis, and they were Sunnis, if you like, because there was no Shias in those days. But when Ali, who was his son-in-law, became the 4th Khalifa, then the split came about, because the people that were non-supporters of Ali, they broke away and they formed the larger faction, which is the Sunni, at that time of that day. And then they have been diverging since then to develop their own schools of law. Sunnis have 4 schools of law. And then the Shias have one that I know of, maybe another, maybe. And then the big difference is that Shias regard the head of the state as being their religious leader. Sunnis don't regard their leader as being a religious head. So this is the big difference in what might be called as the separation of state and religion in a way. So Sunnis have that separation already, whereas Shias don't.
Okay.
Yeah, well, hello, Maggie, are you there? You've gone to sleep?
Hello,
No,
yes, I'm here, and thank you so much. I really, sorry, I'm
okay, good to see you there.
to actually position the video. Yes, because I'm on a small tablet. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. And I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I loved the elephant clock.
Yeah.
I thought that was absolutely amazing. So complex. Now, who would have that? Presumably it'd be somebody in a private house.
Where is it, you mean? Yeah, it's I think in some museum, I think.
Yes. But originally, who would have had a clock like that? Or would...
Oh, I see.
Yes, you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
whether it was a private owner or whether
house?
it was a state, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I would have thought that the Caliph of the day was a very enlightened man. He promoted all sorts of, these projects to get underway. I'm not sure how much of an effort he made towards the building of this clock. So all I can say at the moment is that these engineers, the ability was there and they made it.
Amazing.
Yeah, quite astonishing that.
Yes, yes, yes. No, I just wondered how many were made, because
Oh, I
obviously,
see.
yes, they were man-made, and then, you
Yeah.
know, how many people would be able to afford them?
Well, I think this was much more sort of a national type of project rather than having it individual homes.
Okay.
I don't think like in today we have a clock tower in the villages.
Yes, yes.
So that was the concept of that day. But
Right.
today we have our own wristwatches and so on and phones individually. So we don't look at the clock tower anymore.
Mm.
Mm.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Right, how are we doing for time? And okay, another 2 minutes to go before our time is up. Okay, we're going to continue along these ways. Yeah, you were saying you wanted something, Pamela?
No, I was just looking up where the elephant clock was. There's quite a lot. Because I think they've got one in Topkapi.
In Topkapi, in the museum, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
I think they've got.
Just
Yeah,
a
go ahead,
comment.
Malela.
Just a comment since you mentioned the Radcliffe line and the fact that Britain didn't draw a line. That's because they didn't really expect the country to be divided. I think, I believe, if I'm right, there were Jews moving into Palestine from before the First World War, and they were living with the Palestinians. So, and that continued. And it was only after more recent events in the war that the country was divided and the state of Israel was declared. So I don't think, the way I understand it, Britain hadn't expected the country to be divided. So that is why they didn't draw a line.
I think that Balfour Declaration was a little bit ambiguous in a way. I think
it was a vague statement.
Yeah,
I agree.
But it gave the right to both the Arab and the Israelis, the Jewish people rights, I think, equal rights practically.
Right.
But only one part of that agreement, I believe, was enacted by Israel, and the second part having to do with the Arabs was not.
Oh, right.
So anyway, this is one of those big things of history that the more you go into history, the more sort of loose ends you find. Yeah. Okay, so I'll call it a day now, shall I?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much
also for attending. Very
Thank you very
you
much.
all
That was
again.
very interesting.
Bye.
fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.